Okay, so picture this. You discover an entire continent, a whole new world, just full of forests and wild fruit, and you do it 500 years before Columbus even sets sail. For just a brief, flickering moment in history, that's exactly what Norse explorers did. They called it Vinland, and their story is one of history's greatest what-ifs. So you have these epic stories, the Norse sagas, that were written down centuries later. And in them, they painted a picture of a total paradise. A land just overflowing with all the things they desperately needed back home in Greenland, which was nearly treeless. It honestly sounded like a utopia, the perfect spot for a fresh start. And for centuries, that was the big question, right? Was Vinland a real place, or was it just a myth, a tall tale sailors told that got passed down through generations? To get to the bottom of it, we have to separate the legend from the science. To really get how they even made it to America, you have to understand the incredible momentum they had. These weren't just raiders. The Norse were absolute master mariners, and they were constantly pushing the boundaries of the known world. And the speed of this whole thing is just wow. In a little over 100 years, they island-hopped their way across the brutal North Atlantic. First, they hit Iceland in the 870s, then Eric the Red founded a colony in Greenland by 986, and by the year 1000, his own son was making that final jump into a completely new world. It was just this relentless push to the west. The guy at the heart of this whole story is Leif Erikson. His dad, Eric the Red, had already colonized Greenland. But Leif heard these stories from another sailor who'd been blown way off course and spotted this mysterious tree-covered coastline even further west. So what does Leif do? He buys the guy's ship and sails off to find it himself. And the sagas are surprisingly specific about what they found. Leif's crew actually documented 3 different lands. First was Helluland, the land of flat stones, which was pretty bleak and rocky. Then came Markland, the forest land, which was a huge deal because of all the timber, a resource the Greenland colony had totally run out of. And finally, the grand prize, Vinland. Okay, so they found it. But finding a place and actually living there are 2 totally different challenges. So what was it really like, trying to build a life on the absolute edge of the known world?
Well, when you look at this comparison, you can see the massive incentive. Just think about what Vinland had to offer. Timber for their ships and homes, iron for tools and nails, good pasture for their livestock. Basically everything the Greenlanders were desperately short on, Vinland had tons of. This wasn't just some new land. For them, it was a potential lifeline.
And we know for a fact they took advantage of it. The archaeological site at Lanzo Meadows in Newfoundland, that's the smoking gun. Archaeologists there found the remains of Norse-style houses, but also clear evidence of boat repair and, this is crucial, a forge for smelting local iron from bogs. They were definitely putting those resources to work. Now, it's super important to get the right picture here. We're not talking about some big, bustling Viking city. You should think of these settlements more like forward operating bases. They were small, probably seasonal outposts with one main goal: harvest the goodies from Vinland and ship them back to prop up the main colony back in Greenland. But the Norse were not alone in this new world. It was already home to other people, and the encounter between these 2 cultures would, in the end, decide the fate of Vinland. In the sagas, they call the native people Skrælings. We don't know exactly what that word meant to them, but it was their term for the people they met. And based on where they were, these were almost certainly the ancestors of the Búthuk or other First Nations peoples in that region. According to the sagas, the relationship went south, and fast. After some initial, pretty cautious trading, a simple accident changed everything. A Norse bull got loose and charged. Now to the Skrælings, who had never seen an animal like that before, it must have looked like some kind of monster, a deliberate attack. They ran, but they came back ready to fight. And the battle that came next was completely alien to the Norse. This quote here describes some kind of strange and frightening weapon. Historians think it might have been a type of staff sling, but whatever it was, we know one thing for sure: it struck terror into the Vikings. So, that powerful dream of a new life in the West? Well, it just wasn't enough. The Vinland settlements were abandoned almost as quickly as they were founded, and that leads us to the final chapter of their American saga. It really is the ultimate question, isn't it? I mean, these are the Vikings, the people who terrorized Europe. Why on earth would they turn back from a land with so much potential? Well, the answer isn't just one thing, but a whole combination of fatal flaws. So here they are. First, the constant fighting. The Norse were great warriors, sure, but they were thousands of kilometers from home and totally outnumbered. Second, the sheer distance. That 2,500-kilometer trip across the sea was a logistical nightmare. And third, their home base was falling apart. Greenland was actually getting colder, dealing with its own slow-motion crisis, and it just didn't have the people or resources to spare for a long-distance colony.
And so, within just a few years, maybe a decade or two at most, the whole project was over. The outposts were abandoned, the Norse sailed away for the last time, and their incredible discovery became nothing more than a story, a myth that was whispered for the next 900 years.
But the story doesn't end there, not by a long shot. In the 20th century, a whole new age of exploration began. Not with longships this time, but with archaeologists' trowels, and eventually, with satellites. This is the moment where everything changed. In the 1960s, a pair of Norwegian explorers, Helge and Anne Stein Ingstad, decided to follow the clues in the old sagas, and it led them to Newfoundland. What they found there, at Lands Meadows, literally turned myth into fact. The Vikings had been there. The stories were true all along. And the search is still on today, but now they're using some seriously cool tech. Archaeologists like Sarah Parkak are using satellites to scan the coastlines of eastern Canada from space. They're looking for tiny changes in the vegetation, subtle hints of buried walls or old hearths hidden right under the soil, patterns you could never see from the ground. And this method has already led to some really exciting new clues. At a site called Point Row, which is even further south in Newfoundland, that satellite imagery led to a dig that uncovered what looks a lot like evidence of bog iron roasting. Now, no other culture in that area at that time was doing this. It's a distinctly Norse signature, kind of like a Viking fingerprint. So the story of Vinland shows us how a legend that was dismissed for centuries can turn out to be real, all thanks to persistence and science. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other myths and stories that we've all written off as just fantasy are actually history, just waiting for us to find them.